And I still don't think that line managers are necessarily the right people to actually provide personal support in these sorts of situations. HR, of course, have to face in different directions, the responsibility and duty of care for the individual staff member and also for the manager. So they have to be very careful about the partiality of their advice and their support.
Welcome to the Longest Day podcast. I'm Leah, your host and the founder of Broadstairs Consulting. We are an advisory and mediation consultancy, bringing clarity, focus, and momentum to organizations by helping leaders find creative solutions that work. We help rebuild relationships and facilitate effective dialogue. We are convinced that people matter and that conversations count, so we started The Longest Day, a series of conversations where we learn from the resilience, determination, and candor of our guests. As they look back on their longest days, our hope is that it will empower you to look forward. We hope their stories will be a part of shaping yours. Professor Fiona Ross CBE has a background in district nursing and social policy, and she's worked as a practitioner, teacher, research leader, and senior manager over a 35-year career in higher education. She's had a background in leading systems change, for example, as the Director of Education of the Health Innovation Network and as Director of Research at the Leadership Foundation for Higher Education, now known as Advance HE. Currently, Fiona is working in governance roles, including as the Deputy Chair of the Court of Governors at Westminster University and as a trustee of Great Ormond Street Hospital Charity. Fiona writes about ageing, nursing, and AI. She was awarded a CBE for services to nursing and higher education in the 2015 New Year's Honours List. Well, Fiona, thank you so much for being willing to come on The Longest Day.
Thank you for coming to my house.
No, it's absolutely a treat.
And looking at you across the table with flowers.
No, they are beautiful. Flowers. They are very beautiful and bright. But I suppose taking the conversation in a different direction, perhaps you could tell us about your longest day.
So I think my longest day is kind of framed within the sort of personal and the professional, and those two things have been woven together in my career and the way my work. And at the time, there were really very few role models for developing leadership and developing my career for women, and certainly for nurses who were ambitious and wanted to improve things for patient care. But I just had my first baby, and I was headhunted to go and work at King's College. Went there when she was 8 months old. Had to start writing a new curriculum, social policy, which I'd never done before. It was all really, really demanding. And I look back and I think I must have been completely mad. And after that, I went to St George's Medical School. I was promoted to a senior lecturer, which is sort of a consultant grade in medical school speak. And I was the only nurse working in a Department of General Practice with lots of medics, which was extremely challenging, but it taught me a lot about standing my ground and about my own values and how I taught medical students doing their general practice placement. So that's a bit of a long introduction, but at the time, the NHS was transferring the training of nurse education from hospitals, schools of nursing, into universities. And the medical school decided to bid for the contract, which was worth lots of nice money at the time. And as I was the only nurse, senior nurse, or any nurse actually in the medical school, I found myself involved writing the tender and also doing the stakeholder engagement. And I was also pregnant with our fourth baby. Anyway, we won the tender, but the commissioners said they wanted us to do it in partnership with Kingston University. So it was an old medical school with a long history, very distinguished research history, being told to work together with a new university, which was teaching orientated, didn't have a research reputation, but was doing very brave things around widening participation and opening stalls to disadvantaged students. So they're very, very different cultures and different histories and priorities. And I was part of the senior team designing the sort of joint governance of the partnership, which was unique at the time. And later on, I became the dean of this joint faculty. At the time I was doing that, we'd expanded a lot. We had 6,000 students with a budget of 36 million, which, was a lot for an organisation delivering training for paramedics, for social workers, for physiotherapists, radiographers, nurses, midwives, everybody really apart from medics. One day, my finance officer came to see me, concerned about irregularities that he had spotted around expense claims submitted by a senior member of staff, and I looked at this and couldn't really believe what I was seeing, and there were serious consequences. We conducted an investigation which was supported by the university audit team. There was work done with the individual and eventually an exit strategy arranged, overhaul of the whole expenses and approval system, and the oversight of that. The finance officer decided to resign. So all of this was going on, which for me was very painful and difficult. And mostly, I think, looking back, was difficult because actually I didn't have anywhere to go for support. I was managed by 2 vice-chancellors, but I don't think, and I still don't think, that line managers are necessarily the right people to actually provide personal support in these sorts of situations. HR, of course, have to face in different directions, the responsibility and duty of care for the individual staff member and also for the manager. So they have to be very careful about the partiality of their advice and their support, and probably better at sort of the transactional stuff that they have to do than the actual sort of empathetic sort of working with individuals through crises. So I think senior managers often do get left very isolated and adrift. And, I know that I got my support from my husband, who had a lot of experience running sort of large and complex HR services in big organisations. And he was always there to talk things through in a very confidential and personal way. And I also spent some money actually getting some support from a leadership development coach who I know through other work. So I sort of found my own ways through it. But I think what I realised was that actually organisations aren't very good at providing that kind of working through in a non-judgmental way, and a way that has to maintain boundaries and has to maintain trust, I think, across all the individuals and parties that are involved.
How did that experience of not just being alerted to anomalies, but also that weight of responsibility and getting through that situation help you to be a better leader?
Well, I think you have to be very careful about the trust you have in personal relationships. Because whatever decision that you make about an individual who is well known and recognised within an organisation will be picked up and understood by others. I've always I've always believed that the way in which people leave an organisation is incredibly important in whatever the circumstances surrounding that. So that kind of confirmed my view that actually safeguarding dignity, safeguarding personal confidentiality and boundaries was really important, even though that meant that I knew some people in the organisation looked at me and thought I was the one to blame. So, and I think as a leader, you have to carry that. And that's quite hard. Because if, you sometimes think, well, I'm not sure I completely deserve this, but I think you have to, as a leader, take it on the chin. And that's the tough stuff.
There was fruit from this awful situation, and the organisation was subsequently transformed. How much resistance did you experience in trying to get a new governance model adopted by the organisation?
No, I think we worked very closely on that, actually. And I think through this, the finance directors in both universities, because there's sort of central finance, who are kind of really powerful engines of the university and the medical school, actually came to respect me more than perhaps they had in the past, because I think they saw me as somebody who did see things through. So as a result of it, ironically, I think relationships between the faculty and the kind of centre, if you want to put it like that, were strengthened. We also were able to appoint a new finance director at a more senior level. And we recruited a fantastic woman who had been finance lead in a construction company. She was a woman, she was feisty, she was brave, she really, really worked with people very, very well. She had the confidence of both of the university and the medical school finance director, which was really, really important for me, because the previous guy hadn't. And he wasn't strong enough, and I think in those roles you do need to have people who are ready to challenge, say, this doesn't look right, what's going on here? Let's sort this out now, rather than leave it to till it's got too late, really. So you need people with confidence and experience. And I was very grateful that we recruited a fantastic woman, who then we went on to win, become even more successful, actually, at bringing money in. So there were some very good things that happened. And I think, as I say, the relationship between the joint faculty, of respect, actually, that we'd come out of this in a positive way. So that was good for me.
One of the things that is particularly challenging about situations of misconduct is how long they take to resolve. And you mentioned that the reason that this is one of your longest days is because of the personal and the professional toll. How long did it take from the discovery of the issues with that finance person to recruiting this wonderful replacement female finance director?
Well, it was probably about a year, I should think. It did take a long time, maybe a bit less. But, I was grateful to the finance director of the university who sort of, took the lead. And I recognised that the person recruited needed to be able to get on with the central finance teams. And that was going to be beneficial to what I was trying to achieve. So I can't answer that exactly because I don't remember the dates, but it would have been not much short of a year, because by the time, you've got closure on certain events, then you have to start the recruitment process, and that all takes time.
Are you feeling stuck? Has conflict got you down? Have you considered mediation? Mediation is a confidential and flexible way to resolve conflicts. 86% of all mediations end in a solution, saving time, money, and stress for all involved. Thanet Mediation Centre, a Broadstairs consulting initiative, offers mediation services to individuals and organisations in Thanet, Kent and further afield. For more information or advice, email us at info@broadstairsconsulting.com. We are here to help you move forwards.
What did your external leadership coach / support help you learn about yourself?
Gosh, well, that's all quite a long time ago, and it's sort of got all sort of sucked into other learnings along the way. I mean, I think she would always say that the importance of thinking about the impact that you're having as a person and not underestimating yourself. She would say, I wear my power lightly. That's a good thing, but you need to be able to think in certain situations how people are interpreting that. So I think the lessons around how a leader sort of manages difficult circumstances. I found those sessions really helpful because you're able to talk to somebody who's outside, doesn't know the individuals, can reflect back, be impartial, be challenging, and be thoughtful. And that's kind of what you need when you're thinking through these things.
Your career has come on a long way since then. What other situations did you get an opportunity to live out those learnings in? What other difficult situations had you created greater fortitude to respond to well?
Well, I wanted to talk a bit about responding to the pandemic, because that brings things much more recent. As Chair of Trustees for Princess Alice, which is a medium-sized charity, it provides end-of-life and palliative care service in Surrey and South West London. It's a really high quality organisation which has been rated as outstanding and to sort of CQC inspections. I don't know if you're familiar with that term.
Yes.
Care Quality Commission for those of your listeners who don't know about the NHS. So, and it was the only hospice that's been rated as outstanding across all the domains that they look into, like leadership, governance, well-led, safety, well-being, etc. So, as we all remember, the shock of experiencing a national emergency in the form of a pandemic, which wasn't totally unexpected, but it was pretty unexpected and swift in the way it sort of changed all of our lives overnight. And I mean, that really did keep me awake for, and they were very long days. And they were long days because, and I want to make the point that actually as a chair, you're responsible for the delivery of the service. You're responsible for the financial sustainability and the well-being of the staff, but you don't have a hands-on role in it. It's the executive, the chief executive, and her, in this case, her executive team who are delivering the service. So at the very beginning of the pandemic, being a nurse, I knew that infection control was going to be an issue. And the NHS was busily emptying hospitals in order to free up space for an expected influx of patients. And they discharged quite a few of their patients to places like us and care homes, as you know, from the stories that we're all very familiar with. But hospices like care homes had no access to PPE. We weren't in the chain of distribution. It did change during the course of the pandemic, but not at the beginning. And viruses are very, very effective at infection and transmitting across sectors. So I think one of the things that I was really angry about was that the NHS wasn't seen as a sector full of moving parts, but actually just where care was in hospitals. And this was, there's a whole other story around that. So no PPE. We had to kind of come up with our own sort of initiatives. And I remember local ladies in Kew making scrubs for us from old sheets and duvet covers. The university sort of started making visors because they had labs that there were no students and the universities were closed and they could do that. So there was all sort of hand to mouth, but it wasn't a right way of protecting staff or protecting patients. And I really worried about that. Eventually, the health hospices were recognised as health providers and were part of the supply chain. But that was a big worry. The second worry, of course, was financial sustainability. Suddenly, the curtain came down on fundraising activities. Our charity shops were shut. Everything changed. And so we as trustees worried about how we were going to actually keep the service running, but no income. And you have to know that our service is 80% funded through charitable donations and only 20% through the NHS. So if you're dying, you're actually depending on charity, which is a weird way of doing things. But so we did make the most of the furlough scheme and things, and an emergency fund that was actually we had to fight for from the government to replace fundraising income during that period. So in the end, we were able to kind of offset the financial costs, but it was the worry before that was all put in place. And I think the third thing that was really of concern was the emotional burden on staff. Because the sort of care we give is very personal. It very much depends on interpersonal relationships and the small details of care. And it's very difficult to do that when you've got a visor around your face and you're perhaps looking after somebody who hasn't got the energy to really talk and you can't hear, and is dying but separated from people that they love and the carers. So it sort of really flew in the face of our values as an organisation and the way the staff wanted to care for patients. So a big pressure on staff. So it was a big concern for me as a chair of, how to keep their well-being and their morale going.
As a chair or a leader or a trustee, how do you ensure that the burden of responsibility is sustainable?
Well, I think we talked about that a lot, with my chief exec and senior team. So I think a way that we did that was through distributed sort of sharing of the burden. I decided very early on that the executive had so much to do. They were dealing with changing guidance from national guidance every 5 minutes. Sometimes the medical director had 2 lots of guidance coming out in a day. So they were really up against it. And I decided we were going to sort of stop all the usual meeting agenda because I didn't want them to spend their time preparing papers for trustees meeting. I wanted them to be freed up. But on the other hand, I also knew that we needed to have a paper trail of how we were making decisions and to be able to account for that. So instead of having the usual meetings of investment committee and fundraising committee and da-di-da-di-da, clinical governance, we instituted sort of kind of a weekly sort of email update from key leaders just to keep the trustees in touch with what was happening. We also had occasional sort of just free-floating virtual meetings where that was no agenda, but that we could just share some of the kind of big challenges, highlights of the last week. So it was we completely turned on the head the whole sort of organisational governance stuff for that period. And I think the executive appreciated that. So there was, for me then, I needed to keep on top of the detail. You need to understand enough of the detail without being interfering. While at the same time sort of giving people space to do what needed to be done. And there are some organisations I know, some other hospices where, as the chief exec said to me once, their trustees are all just run for the hills. They've gone to their country houses and things. I mean, there was a bit of that because people were worried. So I think, coming back to your question, it's about sharing. It's about doing things that are right for the moment, and being intuitive enough to be able to decide when to take a punt on doing something different and taking the risk.
As you look back over the breadth of your career, is there anything that you wish that you'd done differently? So
nurses on the whole don't have a voice in policy making. I would have, if I had my time again, I would like to have done more of that. But I suppose, my career has been sort of building for future leaders and sort of succession planning. And I am proud of how nursing actually is beginning to take its place. And I would say that the strike that the RCN had, whatever you think about striking nurses, the first time they'd ever had a strike. And I'm actually proud of that. So I think if I had my time again, I think it's sort of, I would like to see nurses having their place around the policy making table more, and to have had a better, had more of a role in that.
I can't imagine that on your longest day, food was at the forefront of your mind. But if you had to live your longest day again, what food would you choose to fuel it?
Yes, well, I do have a sweet tooth, but I probably don't eat as much sweet things as I used to. And at the moment, I'm a great fan of my husband, who makes his own sourdough bread and kimchi. Do you like kimchi? And if I was had my way, I'd eat kimchi for breakfast, lunch, and supper.
It's supposed to be very good for you. I'm not a fan of the fermentation personally.
I know, it's really nice. So that's one of the things I enjoy. And yes, occasional glass of wine to let go.
Well, thank you very much for giving us an insight into your career, into your leadership experiences, and thank you so much for sharing so candidly on difficult situations from the past. It's been a real encouragement to hear, again, whatever you feel on the strikes, of the fervour that comes behind that and that desire to have better patient outcomes. And so it's been great having you on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you.
You've been listening to a Broadstairs Consulting Limited podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Tune in soon to hear the next instalment of The Longest Day. Copyright 2023. Production copyright Broadstairs Consulting Limited. All rights reserved.